Book friends, we are back. We are here for part 3 of the Color Purple review. I am Miss Bookish. I am most bookish. I go by the name of Amanda, actually. And I am your host for this engaging session of review and analysis and review. So, what are we talking about today? Today, we have gotten to the point where we talked about the ending. We talked about the ending in the last one and how I was not happy. We talked about the ending of the book. We talked about the ending of the 2023 musical and how I was not happy with it compared to the 1985 movie. The character of Albert / Mr. was redeemed in a way that is crap and he doesn't deserve. And if you haven't watched the movies and you haven't read the book, you should, so you can just know what I'm angry about. However, there is a bit of analysis there. And let me start by saying that the books have been wildly successful. She's sold over 5 million copies at this point. She details in her journals, which again, I read in this wonderful book. It is Gathering Blossoms Under Fire, and it spans several decades. She details in this book how much money she was offered and she kept making. It changed her life. She was able to buy multiple homes. She was able to take care of family. She was able to be financially independent for the first time in her life. Between the books and the movie, she has been super successful, and I love that for her. However, also, the 1985 version of the movie was very successful. It was directed and produced by Steven Spielberg. Quincy Jones ended up producing and doing the soundtrack, which she got royalties on. She managed a really great cut of a lot of things from that movie. She also had a kind of love affair go on with Quincy Jones throughout her life. I haven't finished that book. I really wanted to focus on the time period around The Color Purple. As far as I can tell, like, they haven't actually done anything yet, and I'm wondering what happens. Anyways, the movie ends up grossing $95 million, 95 or 96. And it only took $15 million to make. So it was a really successful movie. And I think she got 3% once they broke even. So she did well for herself. The response to the movie, especially by Black men, was not always positive. Because of the depiction of a lot of the male characters being abusive, being violent, and the book is set in a Black world, so all of the male characters are primarily Black. There was a lot of, in the critics' response, I didn't read the book, but we've seen that with other people. You want to be mad about it, just be mad about it. Cool. However, she was not writing a story about Black men. She was writing a story about the experience of Black women during that time. Instead of taking the opportunity to understand the experience that she was trying to illuminate, they took it, Black men in this particular circumstance, took it as an indictment against themselves and a kind of, why are you making us look like this in front of white people? There also is the complication of the fact that the director / producer is Steven Spielberg, who is a white man. And you can question certain choices that he made. In the end of my last review, I just said I did not like the ending. I did not like the idea of Albert being redeemed. However, it's interesting that that version of him not being redeemed, or not being able to be redeemed after all of the horrible things that he did, is Steven Spielberg's version. Originally, Alice Walker was brought on to write the screenplay, but Steven decided that he didn't want that version and he had somebody else write it. Now, like I said, a majority of what's in the movie is dialogue taken directly from the book. Like, it's amazing. But they did cut things out, which, you know, a movie can't be 10 hours long, so you gotta cut some stuff. There are reasons why I see some of it cut out, but the ending is different. Alice Walker didn't love it. All she could see was all of the things that were missing. But then after watching it a few times, she did end up loving it. And like I said, she wrote that amazing letter to Danny Glover, thanking him for his performance and how his performance as Mr. allowed her to heal something in her love for her grandfather, who had been abusive, for her relationship with him and was not, and her reconciling, loving a torturer and bad guy. That complicates it for me, right? Like, do I like the original Black author's version of the ending better? Is there some redemption for this character who she also states that it's not as obvious in the books, but the original implication about how he got the land, I thought, was maybe sharecropping. However, she states in a collection of short essays that she releases later in a letter that she's writing to somebody, she states that the reason why he got that land is because his father is mixed. And you see it in the 1985 version of the movie where his father is very pale. His father is mixed, and he clearly had a father who was a slaveholder. And Mr. inherits how he treats women or people in general from his father, who inherited it from the slave master who was his father. That's how they got that land, because they inherited it from the original slave master. And so it is this opportunity to say that we didn't just inherit being slaves, we inherited the slave master as well and their relationship to us and whatever behaviors we might have learned from them. There's a part where she says, a book and movie that urge us to look at the oppression of women and children by men, and to a lesser degree by women, became the opportunity by which Black men drew attention to themselves, not in an effort to rid themselves of the desire or tendency to oppress women and children, but instead to claim that inasmuch as a negative picture of them was presented to the world, they were in fact the ones being oppressed. She says, it has been Black men, as well as Black women and Native Americans, who have provided in this culture the most inspiring directions for everyone's freedom. As a daughter of these men, I did not hear a double standard when they urged each person to struggle to be free, even if they intended to impart one. And then she goes on to say like some famous examples of like when Malcolm said freedom by any means necessary, I thought I knew what he meant. And when Martin said agitate nonviolently against unjust oppression, I assumed he also meant in the home if that's where the oppression was. She says that Mr. was a character that she deeply loved, not obviously for his meanness, oppression of women, and general early boorishness, but because he went deeply enough into himself to find the courage to change, to grow. It's a mistake to assume that Celie's meekness makes her a saint and Mr.'s brutality makes him a devil. The point is, neither of these people is healthy. They are in fact dreadfully ill, and they manifest their disease according to their culturally derived sex roles and the bad experiences early impressed on their personalities. She says, and this is the part that I was talking actually about in the last video, and it was before I read this, so that's interesting. She goes, at the root of the denial of easily observable and heavily documented sexist brutality in the Black community, the assertion that Black men don't act like Mr., and if they do, they're justified by the pressure they're under as Black men in a white society, is our deep, painful refusal to accept the fact that we are not only the descendants of slaves, but we are also the descendants of slave owners. For me, again, I feel like it is a story about men, not Black men. She's telling it as a story about Black men because she's telling a Black story. She's telling her own Black story. But this story of sexism and women being subjected to abuse is across the spectrum, right? It's not because they're Black men. It's because these women are being abused. And it's not because they're Black women. It's because they're women. But it's within the framework of being Black women. So there's whole other parts of that with the racism and what happened with Sophia. And, you know, it's obviously much more complicated. She says, our white great-grandfathers abused and sold us here, and our Black great-grandfathers abused and sold us there. This should mean that we are free now. We don't owe them anything but our example of how not to be like them in any way. And then in that same essay, she talks about her own history with her white great-great-grandfather and her native great-great-grandmother. I don't know if it was great-great or great-great-great, and how he bought her, or he took her as his wife when she was 11, and the rape that she lived through. So again, echoes of her past and how she wants both of her ancestors to rest in peace and wants to reconcile her being a part of both of them and who they are fully as people, not just as these horrific acts that happened to them or that they perpetrated. And she kind of continues to say that it is much more complex than just these disparate facts. And if you don't ask who these individual people are, you're never going to understand. And the understanding is where you find the freedom. Before the 2023 version of the musical, there was a musical version on Broadway. And she had back then an interview where somebody asked which one she liked better. And she said that she really liked the Broadway musical because it stayed much more true to the actual novel, which I would say is true also of the 2023 musical. I did not see the Broadway musical, so I don't know how closely, if it's literally the same thing as the 2023 one or not, but it was successful. It only ran for 3 years and it made $148 million. Now, compared to some other Broadway shows that top $1 billion, that doesn't seem like a whole lot, but those ones that top $1 billion have been running for 20 years. So 3 years, it's really not bad to have made $150 million. So far, the 2023 movie musical that just came out was the second highest ever Christmas Day release. It made 18.5 million on Christmas Day or Christmas weekend. And the only one that has surpassed that, it was in 2009, a Sherlock Holmes movie. And it just keeps reiterating that Black stories are stories that make money, that people want to see, that need to be told and can be profitable. There's always the stupid argument when she left Ms. Magazine 40 years ago. It was supposed to be progressive feminism, but there wasn't enough exposure of people of color. They never had people, or they barely ever had people of color on the magazine cover. And she writes a whole letter talking about this. Their arguments apparently had always been that those covers don't sell. And today we're still having that argument. And it's so wonderful to see over and over again that it does sell. And there is money to be made, because that's the driving factor, right? If you start digging anywhere deep enough, it's always back to money. How much your voice and your thoughts get disseminated, unfortunately, really comes back to money. It's a little more democratic these days because of social media, but at least in professional art, it's still about the dollar. So far, the movie has made like $60 million. The budget was $100 million. It was much higher than the one from 1985. They're hoping to break at $200 million. I'm not sure how much longer they have to try to get to that number. And of course, there will be the releases on TV and all of that stuff. So either way, I'm going to guess that the 1985 one was a bit more financially successful for them. But I'm glad that the retelling got to be closer to what she had intended. However, there's still plenty of backlash against it. There was a famous rapper, somewhat famous rapper. I'm not going to get into who, because I feel like he just gets way too much exposure for the negative things that he does and says. But he took his daughter or his daughters to the movie and walked out when the lesbian scenes come in, and he says something on social media about like them putting up, he puts a rainbow emoji, like lesbian stuff. And it's wild because, again, this is a movie full difficult subject matter. If you did not want to take, I don't know what the age of his daughters was, but if you did not want to take a really young child to this movie because of the depictions of rape or abuse, the harm that happens to women throughout this movie, I would understand. But the fact that you walked out because women were kissing is so ridiculous. So there's still, things to be said. The 2023 version has much more explicit love between women, physical, romantic love between women going on. I don't know if that person that walked out saw the old version, but there was criticism from all communities about the lesbianism in the last movie as well. And that the fear of the exposure of lesbianism would then prompt a bunch of lesbianism in the Black community, the same way that Superfly had prompted a bunch of cocaine use in the Black community. I don't think at this day and age that anybody's making that kind of argument, but I do believe that homosexuality is still very taboo amongst brown communities in general. I'm definitely not surprised that that's still a topic almost 40 years later. So what do I want you to know about these books? The biggest change besides the ending that I found interesting was Whoopi's strength of character in the first movie versus Fantasia's in the second. And once Whoopi got upset, like, she immediately jumped into being a much more powerful figure. Like, she had been waiting to threaten this guy for all of these years. She had been waiting to like be this other version of herself this whole time. And with Fantasia, she's much more timid, and it seems like there's still fear there, and she's still groping with being a more powerful version of herself. It speaks to, I think, Fantasia's version is much more how the book is written, and it speaks to a comment that Alice Walker makes of how those two characters, Celie and Albert, are very ill, and they have to become much more like themselves to heal while stopping just short of becoming each other and their illnesses. And I've personally known people who struggle, particularly women who struggle with being more assertive in abusive circumstances. And it's really hard to overcome so many years of being brainwashed into believing that you are supposed to be this type of way, that you're supposed to be more timid and you're supposed to allow this abuse. And if you don't, you are some kind of bad woman. And the psychological scars very often are the ones that keep us in prison long after the cage door has been opened. And so it's probably much more realistic that Celie would still be struggling with standing up for herself or being more assertive than ready to fight fight everybody because she's been waiting all this time. I want Celie to be the Whoopi version. I want her to come out ready to fight because I've been mad the whole time that these things are happening to her. But I can understand why she would be the Fantasia version, and that we have to have grace and support her in that journey to this new place. Alice Walker in general was a super free spirit during that time in the 80s. She was very open to self-exploration. She was very open to analyzing herself and why she did certain things. And she just wanted really a life of freedom and ease. She built a home out of the city so that she could kind of just get away. She stated that she writes so that she doesn't have to speak, but the more that she writes, they want her to keep speaking. And she really struggled with that throughout her career. I wonder how much more we would have known of her if she didn't struggle with that. I feel like the color purple is a huge cultural touchstone, and the author of the story isn't as well known or spoken about or studied. And I think that it's because she didn't want to be. I'm glad that there are works out now that we can read about, because I think that her perspective is really interesting and challenges a lot of ideas that we try to make much more simplistic than they are. You have to have the conversation. I was watching a conversation by the woman who narrated this on the audiobook version, Anjanou Ellis, and Amber Phillips, who is a artist and Black feminist and filmmaker. It went really left. And what was interesting is that a lot of the conversation was a difficult conversation that I feel like Alice Walker was having back in the 1980s. I think that Amber was much more in line with Alice's interpretation, which was interesting. If you're looking for the audio version, I don't know who narrates The Color Purple. I don't have that one in audiobook. I always just read the book. It's narrated by Alice Walker. Oh, that would be a good one to listen to. There are other books. I think there's a book 2 and a 3 that were written after the fact. They continue the story. I want to say one is about Olivia, and I can't remember who the other one is about, but I've never read them. However, the journals, like I said, are narrated by Anjanou Ellis, and I had originally tried to listen to this on audiobook because I was on a road trip. It's a little difficult because the story's narrated by Anjanou, but there's a lot of postscript throughout this story. So it's not a story. There's a lot of postscript throughout this book because it's a journal and Alice is just writing to herself. So when she's referring to Bob, she knows who Bob is. So there's the postscript down here, or the annotation down here, that says Bob is blah, blah, blah. This is the Bob she's referring to. The audiobook has the editor of these journals doing the annotation portion. They have the editor of the journals doing annotation, and then they have Anjanou doing the journals. And it's a little weird. It's hard to follow. So maybe it'll be easier for you to follow, but I didn't love it. I just ended up reading the book. And the book is a really quick read because it's journals. I don't know, again, because of the way that she writes, but it goes really fast. I'm going to give The Color Purple. It's a classic. Am I supposed to give all classics like 5 pandas because they're classics? I would say The Color Purple is a modern classic. In as much as it can be, if taken from that context, it would be a 5 panda book outside of the way that it ended, because I don't love it. Even with her explanation, get it. I know, I understand, but I don't like it. I'm gonna say 4.5 panda because of the ending, and because I think Suge's running off with the young guy was an addition that really, I don't know what it added to the story, but overall it would be like 4.75 panda, actually 4.75 pandas, because it really was phenomenal. And why you should read the book is because it forces you to have a conversation with yourself, with the world, about how soon ago, I don't know if that's grammatically correct, how soon ago this was, how much road we've traveled since the book writing, but also since the setting that I was in, how much further we still have to go, how so many of the themes are still applicable to different degrees, but still applicable in today's world when you talk about sexism, when you talk about homophobia, when you talk about racism, how much of life in America versus life in the South versus life in Africa, and how much of the history of how we got here is still affecting where we are and impeding where we are possibly able to go. There are so many really important conversations happening in this book that I think are forever conversations. I think it's Five Pandas. Guys, thank you so much for coming. I hope you like this one. I hope it's getting better. I have more followers. I'm so excited. I'm so excited about where we're going. I have a plan for this year that is, I don't know, guys, it's about to get wild. I mean, in so much as by wild, like that reading lots of books and making art about them can be. But if you find that to be wild and exciting, then share my excitement with me. Subscribe, like this video, like and subscribe to the video, and subscribe and like the video, and comment down below on whatever you want to comment. Tell me if you liked it. Tell me if you like the videos being broken up into 3 versus 1 full video. I'm trying that out. I hope we like it. But if we don't, I want to know. Stay tuned. The next video is going to be about N.K. Jemisin and Octavia Butler. They're very famous Black sci-fi writers, and we're going to get into some of their books that I have read in sci-fi, Black women in sci-fi, Black people in sci-fi. If you're interested in any of that, or you find any of the conversations we've been having interesting, then come back next time right here. Same channel, not TV channel, YouTube channel. Same time, same place. Do you remember that from old TV? I don't know. Same channel. I'm going to still be here. Hopefully you'll still be here, and I'll see you soon. Bye, guys.